Winter is a good time to get a lot of work done in the studio because living out in the country you have many other considerations such as the garden or taking care of the house. And once spring comes around, it beckons you outside. It's a natural reaction. So winter is a nice quiet time to get as much work done as you possibly can. I don't know that you can talk about the absolute meat of what someone's doing in a painting. You can talk about the objects in it, you can talk around it, you can talk about the texture, the light, the color. But to actually say what exactly are you doing, particularly in abstract painting, that's very difficult. When I go into the studio, for me painting a lot of the time is an escape, and it's creating a picture, because that's what it is basically. It's a picture to begin with. It's a picture of another state of mind. It's a picture of another world in which one inhabits. You have to load another one on. Paintings that I do all have their own individual presence. And often that does not necessarily reflect what my mood is at the particular moment. It can be also what I strive to have at that moment, but perhaps don't. So often they can be an ideal state that I strive for. I really like to work with subtlety quite a bit. I like to work with symbolism, but I don't like the symbolism to be so obvious and upfront. So I'm thinking that when I title a painting, I like the words to reflect the fact that I want subtlety in there. I guess it's another way to make people spend a little bit more time with the painting rather than just read the sentence, know exactly what the painting's all about, and move on to the next. You know, I want them to spend a little bit of time with it. And that's so contradictory to what people are experiencing these days, given the fact that we're bombarded with media. The whole object of media is not to take your time, to get very quick bits of information.
173. Just
as usual.
Painting is the complete opposite of that, I feel. Like that. They don't concern themselves with contemporary politics. They're not social statements. They're more subtle. So you can't say, well, my paintings are about A, B, C, and D. My paintings are about who I am, and that comprises a whole range of emotions and activities. And I can describe maybe a few of them, but that will only talk about a small aspect of the painting. And not to mention the fact that painting is for the viewer as well. And every painting draws the viewer into their own experience. And hopefully the painting will imbue a very positive experience for the viewer. Well, I start working with layers of oil paint, generally mixed with linseed oil, but I get to a point in the painting where I start to work with transparent glazes. And that's an important part of the process because I'm working with the idea of objects coming and going within their very shallow space. Space is created through many different ways. It can be created through the color, specifically the color. I mean, as soon as you put down a dark color, we already sense space in that color. It's just the way we see dark colors. But I deal with very shallow spaces, I think, on the whole, although now and then I will accentuate the painting with a very deep space, and I'll use a very dark color there, just to make the objects appear a little closer to the surface. Well, the image has developed over a number of years because at the beginning I was dealing primarily with very traditional still life setups. I was working directly from objects. And I found that I started to eliminate objects, and I was looking for much more clear, simple spaces. And I was also freeing the objects up from their very traditional sense of ground on a table with a background, that sort of thing. So I was pulling them away from that and just dealing primarily with objects on a very undefined ground. And so that sort of premeditated the idea of working with very simple abstract shapes, the shapes in between the objects as well as the shapes of the objects themselves. They're beyond the idea of looking at them as objects, physical objects in a real space as we know it. They're occupying their own space on a painting plane, which is quite different from the space that we occupy. Generally, don't stop and consider these things when you're painting, not in a verbal way in your mind anyway. You're just sort of going through the motions and you've got it down to a point where you don't verbalize. So the actual objects became really of prime importance, whereas before when they were set in very traditional still life settings, the overall setting was interesting, whereas when you start to simplify the setting and pick maybe a couple of objects, the objects themselves become of utmost importance because they're the central focal point of the painting. And particularly when you free them up from any sort of gravitational base, then they really take on a very shape and form orientation. So you have to make them really interesting objects in themselves. Well, I think the idea of contemplative mood in the painting is a byproduct of the simplification of it. Because if you stop to think for a minute, when you look at very busy paintings in terms of gestural busy, color busy, different lighting busy, that doesn't evoke a contemplative mood. So I think the whole byproduct of a very simplified painting is one of calm and contemplation. So obviously that contemplative side of the work is very much a strong part of my personality and always has been. And I don't think it's been a coincidence that these previous ideas of simplifying the subject matter and freeing the objects and getting into contemplative spaces, I don't think it's a coincidence that happened when I moved out to the country. I think they go hand in hand. You get away from the very busy, busy city, mind-boggling busy city environment. You move to the country, it's very quiet. You've got a lot of time to focus in on very simple things. You start to look at the grass and the trees, and I think that's going to be reflected in painting at least some of the time. And in my painting, it certainly became a major factor. There's a sense that I want viewers to have when they walk in to a room and look at my paintings, and that is one of quiet, contemplative perhaps, but not necessarily spiritual, because everyone doesn't have a spiritual bent. Just a reaction in which they take their time, they enter the space of the painting, and I think in this case, when you're in a room with a lot of paintings of what appear to be ancient vessels, perhaps it will be able to transport them a bit, create a timeless sense with them, get them away from that anchoring in the present, and the present includes everything about them, their problems, their activities, you name it, the politics at the time. Perhaps it takes them a bit out of that and gives them an extra space to breathe. And maybe some of that space will be transported a bit in time. Perhaps it'll just be a free area for them, a quiet time. I think the best way to approach one of my paintings is to spend some time with it. That's putting a lot on the viewer, because we're asking the viewer to relax, to come in, let's say, to a gallery and relax and look at the work. Try to leave all their preconceptions at the door. Try to leave their need to learn quickly at the door, and just take your time with something.